My name is Josh Covert, and I'm the CEO for Meds Cafe. I had previously been a cannabis attorney for approximately 10 years, and that's really why I went to law school, was to fight the drug war in regards to cannabis. I grew up in a home where my parents had used cannabis, and I had grew up around it and realized my parents weren't criminals. And one of the things that as I got older, I started thinking about more of a big picture type thing. And I thought, what if one of my parents went to jail for cannabis? And I realized that I didn't really know what to do about it other than become an attorney and be a criminal defense attorney and try to help people from being criminals and enforce the Constitution in regards to search and seizure and things like that. And so that was my focus when I went to law school, was to fight the drug war. And I ended up taking an LLM, which is an advanced law degree, additional classes. And my focus for that was cannabis law. So every class I took, I had to write a paper that wrapped cannabis up into that class. And so I then started working with John Turgowski and Dan Groh in Kalamazoo, and they were attorneys that were also doing cannabis law. And from there, I worked with the Nichols Law Firm and really expanded my cannabis practice and took on a lot of cases early on in my career that made a difference. One of those cases was kind of known as free breed, if people were to look it up that way. And it involved parents that had their child taken away from them for cannabis, a young child that was still nursing. And it was really emotionally charged. A lot of people felt that the state was overreaching by taking a nursing child from the mother because there was medical use of cannabis. And so that case really, I ended up taking pro bono and helped them get their child back without any admission of guilt. And the state essentially backed down. And from there, I took on more and more cannabis cases where I represented caregivers that had been raided, dispensary owners, and lots of different types of cases, CPS cases, even a few divorces where cannabis became an issue. And so really that was the focus of my practice for quite some time. And I started becoming more of an activist really as well when I took on that free breed case, because I saw the power of what can happen when people get together and if they protest or let the people at large know about this issue. And going back to that free breed case, one of the things that was really important was the media. I think the media picked that case up and brought attention to what the state was doing, and then the state didn't really want that attention because it wasn't right, And sometimes things that maybe aren't right go on anyway because nobody's aware of it, right? And so I started realizing the importance of activism. And when I was with the Nichols Law Firm, my business card said attorney/activist. And that's because that's the way I looked at myself. I wasn't just an attorney. I also had a bigger purpose, and that was, creating change, and specifically around cannabis. And so then I became a board member of MI Legalize in 2015, and started really working towards that change with a group of other really cool people that I consider great friends. And we worked hard to, and worked forward towards this legalization that we see today. We ended up being part of the committee to regulate marijuana like alcohol. MI Legalize was one of those partners or one of those members in that coalition. And we worked with other groups like the Marijuana Policy Project, Michigan NORML, and the State Bar Association's Cannabis Law Section. And together it happened, and we now have adult use marijuana legal here in the state of Michigan. And that's kind of, I guess, what started that transition to me doing different things was part of that. I worked really hard to put myself out of business by legalizing cannabis. I made my money by representing people that had been charged with cannabis crimes. But to me, I was only doing it because I wanted them to have good representation. And I wanted someone that was going to fight for them, right? And I wasn't necessarily doing it for the money. I had bills to pay, but I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, right? And so as that transition occurred, marijuana became legal, I started doing a lot more business law. I worked with hundreds of different cannabis businesses throughout my time, working in this. I started the Michigan Cannabis Lawyers 5 years ago, and that was the primary focus of that was business law. I did continued my criminal defense as cases were kind of getting finished through the system, in terms of legalization, and then we pretty much transitioned to a business law firm, and I had hired other attorneys, and we had represented hundreds of different cannabis businesses in one way or another, anything from forming the business to getting them licensed to helping them with compliance, trademarks, whatever. And so I got to know a lot of different things about the cannabis industry. And as I started doing less and less criminal defense, that had always been my passion and my focus, I started thinking about doing something different. And I got offered this job with Meds Cafe shortly before the new year, and I decided to take that leap and try something different and try to be an advocate for the cannabis user, be that activist in some ways, but doing it from a different perspective now. In some ways, the war has been won when it comes to the legality of cannabis and the average consumer. There are still a few things out there that need to probably be addressed, like driving laws in cannabis. I think they're currently, not according to science and are incorrect. But other than that, I think most everything's kind of non-existent when it comes to cannabis and criminal defense. So having this new job, gives me a way to kind of do things for the cannabis user or the cannabis consumer, and to kind of take that next step after legalization. When I worked with MI Legalize, like I mentioned, they were a bunch of my friends, people I'd known from doing cannabis law, a couple attorneys, a few other people, a retired kindergarten teacher, the first pediatric patient in Michigan who was kind of bringing that perspective in, a parent of a child who used cannabis, and those are who we all got together, it was a group of us, and that wasn't to figure out what's right for businesses in Michigan. It was really our initial viewpoint with MI Legalize was to do what's right for the consumer and do what's right for the user of cannabis. And so that was our viewpoint as we went forward with what's known as MRTMA, or the Michigan Regulating Taxation of the Marijuana Act. And like I mentioned earlier, we were part of that coalition in terms of MI Legalize, and again, I was on their board. And so we spoke on behalf of the consumer when a lot of these different issues came up. And it was important to us for people to maintain the right, for instance, to grow 12 plants per household. And those are things that I dearly protect. A lot of the parts of the legalization law, in terms of how it protects the consumer and allows the consumer to engage in cultivation of cannabis. They can transport their own cannabis, and a lot of different things. And then it also created this industry too, which is great, because I think cannabis users and consumers deserve a store that they can go to that has a wide variety of products at reasonable prices. And that's not something I've seen a lot of times, especially early on. We saw a lot of prices higher than what cannabis consumers were used to paying. People didn't all of a sudden just start buying cannabis when it became legal. Most of your consumers had already been purchasing cannabis, and they were familiar with certain prices. The wholesale and retail markets at that point, because this was a new industry, had a hard time meeting those prices. But today, with the supply, the number of licenses, we're able to provide a product that it competes with prices people have been used to paying. We're selling products, $20 an eighth is what we sell all of our bulk strains at, and we have about 40 varieties. And so that's something I think the consumer deserves, right? They are used to buying it some other place. Those places didn't have 40 strains. They would have a couple. They might have one or two flavors of gummies that they made in their kitchen. And I'm not saying anything bad about caregivers and people that do grow their own cannabis or make it, but what I'm saying is it's not for the consumer necessarily, right? The average consumer. The consumer deserves options. We have, again, 40 strains of bulk flower, pre-packaged flower, and more flavors of gummies and vape carts than I can count. And I think that's what really is my focus right now as their CEO, is giving the customer what they deserve, right? And what they deserve is is that. Good prices, good selection, good service. And to me, that's how I can make a difference. I've seen lots of cannabis companies charge what I believe to be more than they should for their cannabis. And I don't know if it's because there's this entitlement because, you know, I've been selected to have a marijuana license, or they're used to margins, high margins because of the elevated price at the beginning of this industry. But I think, you know, long term, the cannabis companies need to sell products at a price point that competes with what people are used to paying on let's say, the street level, so to speak. And that's something that we certainly do, if not better. So that's kind of, you know, I guess my story and my history. I guess I could talk a little bit more about some cases that I've done over my years of an attorney. I did several trials where we would actually put in front of a jury cannabis issues. I did one in Gaylord with somebody who became a dear friend of mine, Al Witt, and we put it in front of a jury to see, you know, will a jury convict someone of selling marijuana to someone with a card at an unregulated dispensary? Because there was a lot of contention years ago about these unregulated dispensaries. In some communities, they would pop up, and we would see them get shut down and get raided and get charged with crimes. Other communities like Lansing, they were embraced. This is where my office, you know, is here in Lansing. And at one point, we had 90 unregulated dispensaries here in the city of Lansing, and I ended up representing quite a few of them in terms of, you know, being on retainer in case they got raided. But that didn't really happen in Lansing. Other communities like Gaylord, they got shut down. And we didn't, you know, we weren't sure. I guess there was a question on whether or not a jury is going to convict someone when they see these businesses and they hear what the person's getting charged for is having a medical marijuana card and selling marijuana to someone that has a medical marijuana card, right? And the prosecuting attorneys in some communities didn't like that and didn't believe that was lawful. And so, you know, we took a case to trial and put it in front of a jury and had the whole courtroom was full with observers, people that were interested, you know, in cannabis and the law and wanted to watch this. And we ended up getting a kind of mixed bag result. The jury didn't convict on one, hung jury on another, and convicted on one. It seemed to be somewhat of a compromise because you can't really convict someone of one of the crimes without convicting them of the other lawfully, the way it works. But the jury verdicts are final, and they, you know, apparently found a way to get around that, right? So anyway, what I'm kind of bringing that up is like that was a big case for me too. And that the cool part about that is that, you know, my buddy Al Witt did end up doing a jail sentence for that case, and he ended up getting out of jail and ran for city council, and he's now on the city council in Gaylord. And so that was a really big case, and it's just one of them that was big to me is see how it turned out, right? That like a year later, he was on city council reviewing the police's budget when it came to different things. Whereas he had just gotten out of jail for a cannabis crime, but the community supported him. You know, the community liked him, didn't view him as a criminal, right? And he's still a city council member to this day. And now Gaylord is licensing dispensaries, has open dispensaries, and it's kind of come full circle, right? And so to me, that was like a really cool part about being an attorney is to be a part of that and to see that and to be there to back someone up that really believes in it and to be there for them and then see what they've done with that is really cool. And then another case was really important to me was the improper transport statute. That was a law that prevented medical marijuana patients from transporting their marijuana outside of a locked box in their trunk. And people were getting prosecuted for it all across the state every day and going to jail for it. You know, getting arrested, having to get bonded out, having to go to court, having to pee in a cup, and all these different things when the law didn't actually even apply to them. But prosecuting attorneys were getting it wrong, judges were getting it wrong. And so that's an issue I took on and filed motions, you know, in several different courts across the state, waiting for a court to disagree with my interpretation. And when it happened in Clinton County, we were able to go up to the circuit court where we were again denied. And we were then able to finally go to the Court of Appeals and get the Court of Appeals to agree with my interpretation of the law. I mean, other attorneys had the same interpretation, but this is something I was really passionate about. And the Court of Appeals said that you're correct. The improper transport statute, because it's contained in the penal code, does not apply to medical marijuana patients because that's within the Public Health Act. And the Medical Marijuana Act was very clear in that you can't be prosecuted for a crime as long as you follow this act. It didn't say this act and other acts or anything like that. And so it was pretty clear to me and a lot of other attorneys and some judges, but it took, I don't know, it was a year and a half or more for that change to really take effect. And once that happened and the Court of Appeals agreed with me, that statute was no longer being enforced by police officers. So every day, somebody wasn't getting arrested for something that they would have otherwise been arrested for. And to me, that was another powerful case and something that really kind of fed that passion to be a cannabis attorney, was to be able to right wrongs sometimes.